Hello, fantasy racing fans. Welcome to this week's Atlanta Motor Speedway edition of Dan Beaver's NASCAR Fantasy Racing Pit Stop. I'm Charlie Turner. He's Dan Beaver. Hey, Dan, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm great. Looking forward to another night race this week, this time at the similarly configured mile-and-a-half track at Atlanta Motor Speedway. I got that out without stuttering for a change. I've been practicing all day.
It takes a couple of attempts, and now that we're into our sixth one,
Yeah, finally.
yeah,
Something long enough. Of course, next week I'll probably fall right back into it. Of course, next week I don't have to worry about it. It's Richmond. But this is has always been one of my favorite racetracks. I don't really even know why. I think maybe some of it had to do with I was a big Bobby Labonte fan for the years that Labonte was competitive, and he always did very well down here, and that probably is part of uh, my secret love for Atlanta Motor Speedway. But it's a fast racetrack, and I like fast racetracks.
yeah, and it's I don't know. Some of my affinity for it stems back to when it was a true oval. I mean, it was definitely one of the more unique tracks at that point, and then it got remade into Charlotte's image, and a little less unique now, but it still hosts some good races.
Yeah, and it's the fact that the event is at night. That's for me. That's a positive as well. I just like the way these races look this time of year at night, and they kind of get away from your. You don't have to make a decision about whether you're going to watch the NFL game or the race or how you're going to split your time. You can watch usually watch the NASCAR race without the split. I don't know, split loyalties kind of thing.
I don't know if there's a Sunday night race or Sunday night game this week or not, but that's the hidden shame in what I do is I don't really get to pay attention to football until Thanksgiving, and by then my teams are well out of it. So,
Yeah, well, mine too. The one thing I think is this week is most of the NFL action is winding up on Friday. There are a lot of games tonight. We're doing this recording this hangout on Thursday, and several of the games are tonight. They try to get this thing ended up because the rosters have to get cut to the final 53 number by Saturday at 7 p.m. I think. So you'll be done with games by then.
yeah,
So no Monday night game this week, no Sunday night game either. So.
cool, cool.
All right, so let's talk about Atlanta, and let's start talking about it in regards to or in relation to salary cap games. What's the strategy this week? What's the official way to go? I do know that Ty Dillon is entered for the first time, so I would think is he cheap or not?
I think Ty Dillon makes a good, certainly a good salary cap pick. Most games they've got kind of a set amount that they're going to put a driver in. It whatever it is depends on the game, but it tends to be towards the lower part of the salary cap. And the number 33 comes in two versions. There's a version that gets some support from RCR when they've got their normal stable of drivers in, like David Stremme, etc. And then there's an enhanced version when they've got people like Brian Scott or Ty Dillon.
Or yeah, the grandson of the owner running.
Yeah, yeah. Then there's that third level that adds to the grandson of the owner. Uh, so you can expect that they're definitely going to have as much support as they possibly can. The car is going to be just as strong as anything else out of the RCR stable. And so the caveat or the kicker or the tiebreaker is what can Ty do? I think you look back at what Austin Dillon did in his first race in pretty much the same circumstance. It was someone else they had um, the relationship with at that point. But he finished in the low 20s, and I don't think there's any reason to believe that Ty Dillon won't finish in the low to mid 20s as well. And if that's the case at a bargain basement price, he's certainly going to do better than a Landon Castle or probably even a David Gilliland with well-established teams, and I think that makes him a good value. So if you're starting from the bottom, put Ty Dillon in, find another couple of mid-cap drivers, and then start filling in your marquee drivers this week.
Well, speaking of marquee drivers, who are the marquee drivers for this racetrack?
I think you'd be hard-pressed not to make Jeff Gordon a favorite. It's not that he ever really went away, but while he was He's made the chase every year except I think 2005 when it was a 10-man chase. A lot of people think that he's the reason they went to 12 men the next year. So he's never gone away, but his results certainly have softened. He's not the same kind of dominant driver that he was the end of the 1990s, beginning of the 2000s. But Atlanta's one of those tracks where it never really affected him. He won in 2011. He finished second in 2012. He finished sixth last year. So this is one of those tracks where he's kept his ability. He's kept his setup notes or his setup feel, and continues to do well. He struggled last week at Bristol, which is actually kind of good news because he hasn't had two bad races in a row. So as the marquee drivers go, I think Jeff Gordon's got to be right there at the top. Matt Kenseth is another consistent driver. He's going to finish probably somewhere in the 6th to 12th place range, maybe the 8th to 12th place range. Probably won't really contend for a top 5, but he won't struggle too much and he won't finish too far away from the 10th place mark. Kevin Harvick, I think, is another driver if he can keep from making mistakes, if the pit crew can keep from making mistakes. He's gotten his mojo back here. He won his first race here. He finished well in his second race here as a rookie and didn't win a long time before he got another top 10. Those started coming back in 2008, and since then he's finished 13th or better in every race. So he's got, see, what is it exactly? Going to need to move you a little bit. He has 8 top 13 finishes in the last 9 races and enters with a 3-race top 10 streak here. So he's been the class of the field on a number of occasions, but then makes a mistake and hurts himself, or the crew makes a mistake and hurts the team. So putting him on the roster means that you're going to have to worry about that until the very final laps, but he certainly should run well here. Whether or not he finishes well is going to be determined by circumstances. So I think those are the drivers that you're really looking for among the marquee drivers. Jimmy Johnson, I probably wouldn't think this week as a marquee driver. It's not that he's been bad here in the past. He's got 3 victories from 2004 through 2007, so he certainly knows how to get around. He finished second to Gordon in 2011, but his last 2 starts here, 34th and 28th, have both been marred by crash damage. And my notes aren't good enough to know exactly what they were testing or what they were working on when he wrecked. I suspect it was the same kind of thing that we've been seeing in the last few weeks, where they've been playing with tire pressures and getting themselves way off the mark. Don't think that's done yet necessarily, or I don't think it's been proven that they've stopped gambling on things like that. So I'm going to leave him in the garage until Chicagoland. Not even going to think about him this week or next week at Richmond.
Yeah, I could see them actually using this race as a place to test for that upcoming Charlotte Chase race, and maybe even Kansas. You kind of look at it that way. So yeah, I could see that. Even Chicago.
Well, we've got 4 races on the similarly configured mile and a half tracks coming up in the Chase: Chicagoland, Charlotte, Texas, and the other one, Kansas. So each one of them's a little bit different, but what they learn here, they're going to take that with them there. So since they've proven that they're willing to gamble, I think any of the drivers really that are in that locked-in position carries some risk. I've already mentioned that I think Harvick and Gordon are good choices. I don't think they gamble nearly as much as a Johnson or a Keselowski. Keselowski might not be the best overall pick this week, except that he's probably a little bit cheaper than a Jimmy Johnson. Historically, hasn't run quite as well on the similarly configured mile and a half tracks. So, but I think you got to worry about any of those drivers who are locked in doing something foolish.
Okay, well then, what about the drivers that are just outside? The guys like Greg Biffle, Ryan Newman, Casey Kane, some of those that are really need a win. I mean, does that give you a little more? Are you a little more willing to pick them this week because of that?
Kenseth and Newman, I think, are the drivers that are the least likely to do something silly. They need points or a win. And so long as they get either, they're doing okay. They're not going to get knocked out. We've only got 2 more races. That means at least 2 positions are going to go to points. Those are the drivers who are most likely not going to get overtaken by the pack. Newman a little bit less than Kenseth, but Newman really, like I said, he can't afford to do anything too risky, because if he does and fails, then the pack will catch him. Kenseth almost certainly won't do anything silly, and he's got top 15s going back to 2005, perfect streak of, what is that, about, sorry to keep moving you, about 13. I've got you in a different place. I got my
It's okay. Now I know how those people in California felt last weekend.
What do you mean? So he's got a 13 race streak of top 15s. He's a good yeoman's driver here. I don't think he's going to challenge for the win, though, because he can't afford to challenge for the win so much as challenge for a good finish. If he's there and he's in position, I don't think you can count him out. Had a second place finish as recently as 2010, so obviously he's capable of winning here. Newman, again, that same thing. But you find that those drivers then, like Biffle, they can get there either way. If they keep running well, if they keep running solidly, they're probably going to make it. The driver that's most likely to catch him is Kyle Larson. He's a rookie. He's quite a few points behind. So I don't think they're worried about him as much as maybe they should be. But I don't think they're going to let him get them off of their game. They're going to continue to do what they've been doing. And for Biffle, that means probably a good solid top 15 finish here. He's, where is he up here? He's got top 15s in his last 3 Atlanta starts, top 10s in 2 of the 3 races before that, and he's coming off of a 5-race top 15 streak for the season. So all of those numbers kind of point to he's going to finish somewhere around 10th, low teens, high single digits, and that makes him a good value in most salary cap games.
All right. Anybody else jump out at you as somebody you would consider for those people who are, need a little flexibility, I guess, and they're putting it together?
I'd probably jump down one more and make one more mention for a driver, a bargain basement driver. Michael McDowell is entered again this week. If he makes the show, this team has really done well with the resources that they have. Last week was one of their better finishes. He finished 18th, 26th back at Indy. He was 7th at Daytona. So this team has had some really good runs. And he was running extremely well at Watkins Glen before he got caught up in that wreck. He's not going to give you, probably not going to give you a top 20. Might not give you a top 25. But I'd say he's a good bet to get a top 30 finish, and at a bargain basement price, that makes him a good choice.
All right. Any final thoughts on salary cap before we move on to talk about the Yahoo game?
No, not really. I think this is one of those races I'd start from the bottom and work my way up, and let the top 2 slots fill themselves. Fill it with the best possible driver, which probably means the most expensive driver, the most expensive 2 drivers that you can get when you get to the very top of that list.
All right, and so before we segue into the Yahoo game, I want to take this moment to remind people that Dan is of course the lead fantasy racing writer for YahooSports.com. Writes a fantastic Yahoo Sports article, Yahoo game article every week for YahooSports.com. That'll be going live today.
It's already up there. Yeah.
Is it up today? Okay. So if you're sitting down thinking about your team this week, make sure you get over to Yahoo.com and YahooSports.com and download Dan's PDF and read that. Use that. Keep it for your library. It's always priceless information if you're making fantasy picks. And then also Dan writes for Rotoworld.com. Boy, I'm getting better at it. I need to really put that up on my screen here. Rotoworld.com, a completely different type of article, but it's also really good stuff. Anything Dan writes about any of these races is fantastic. So go to Rotoworld.com and read those articles there as well. So now we go to the Yahoo Sports game. Where do you want to start?
You got to treat each level on its own, so you can start anywhere. B tends to be probably the most challenging place to start because we've had two dominant drivers there. Keselowski and Joey Logano have scored the most points many more times, the top 2 points many more times than they can be used in the game. So you got to look at them and you decide what types of tracks you're going to run them on. The unrestricted intermediate speedways, which for me is the similarly configured mile-and-a-half tracks plus the 2-mile tracks, are probably the places where they have the best opportunity to shine because they've got the Penske power. They certainly have the handling to get that power to the track. So that's where I tend to concentrate those drivers. That means this week they're going to be good picks. But if you've gotten to this point in the season where you've nearly exhausted them, you got to start thinking outside the box a little bit. This week, I think with Roush Fenway Racing sweeping the top 10 last week at Bristol, it indicates that they're starting to get their ducks in a row. Too soon to jump on the bandwagon completely, but if you are if you're desperate for allocations for some of the other drivers, you're going to have to start to make some big moves at this stage of the season. And Biffle and Edwards are good big move players right at the moment. Edwards has been almost perfect here every race that he's been incident-free. Problem is, he's got quite a few races with incidents. A couple of blown engines, a couple of accidents. He got black flagged a few years back for retaliating against Brad Keselowski for an earlier incident. So it's not that he can't stay out of trouble, but when he does, half of his finishes have been top fives plus another couple of seventh-place finishes. So he deserves a slot on your provisional roster, and if he practices and qualifies well, if he says nice things about his car, he's been really good about being open and honest about what his car is doing this year, then he gets the start. Biffle's good for that 15th place finish, which doesn't mean that he's going to be the top 1, 2, or 3 points earners this week, but you might be willing to give up a few positions in order to more or less guarantee yourself a top 15. If you take roll the dice on a Jamie McMurray or even a Ryan Newman, who've been a little more inconsistent, you could get a top 10, top 5 finish. They're both capable, but you could also get a finish somewhere down in the 20s. So I would look at the Roush Fenway guys, and I'd even throw Ricky Stenhouse Jr. in there. Last year, he just missed the top 15 here. If a rising tide lifts every ship in the harbor, so if Roush Fenway is coming back, they're going to bring Stenhouse with them as well. And I don't think he'll finish in the top 10. I don't think Roush Fenway will sweep the top 10 this week, but I think they could sweep the top 15, and Stenhouse could finish somewhere in there on the high side of that range, but could have a finish in the low to mid-teens. You go to Group A, and I think we've already mentioned my pick is my top-ranked driver this week is Jeff Gordon, just because he doesn't have 2 bad races in a row. He's got a good record at Atlanta, and something that we didn't mention when we were talking about salary caps. He's one of 2 drivers who have swept the top 10 on similarly configured mile-and-a-half tracks this year, along with Matt Kenseth. So those are the 2 drivers that are the most attractive to me in the in Group A. Kenseth is a little difficult to select to handicap this week because there are a couple of conflicting numbers. You look at his Atlanta record, and it says he's going to finish maybe in the top 10. But you look at his cookie cutter record, or his similarly configured mile-and-a-half track record, and it says that he's probably going to finish in the top 10. He's probably going to finish somewhere between 8th and 12th. And that would make him a great pick in Group B, but he needs to finish. He definitely needs to be somewhere in the higher end of that range, maybe even contending for a top 5 before he's a good pick in Group A. But as with Biffle, you might be willing to give up a position or 2 if you're exhausting Gordon, if you're exhausting Kevin Harvick, and take Matt Kenseth. Down in Group C, Ty Dillon has been just got added to the game today. So Ty Dillon is there and available. He's going to get beaten by Austin. He's going to get beaten by Kyle Larson. But the question is by how much, and whether or not that makes him good allocation management play. Danica Patrick had a 7th place finish at Kansas earlier. Justin Allgaier's had some solid top 20 finishes. on this track type, but they're probably not going to challenge the two marquee drivers nearly as much, nearly as well as Ty is. So I think Ty makes a good pick. He certainly should be on the provisional roster, so you can see how he practices. And then if your choice is between either Austin Dillon or Kyle Larson, I'd go with Dillon. Larson's been better overall this year, but Dillon's been a little bit better on the similarly configured mile-and-a-half tracks, and he has more experience there because that's where most of his pre-rookie races started off. Knowing that was going to be the key to success this year, that's where Richard had him racing last year and the year before. So he's got more experience on the mile-and-a-half tracks than Kyle Larson does, and it shows up in his results.
Okay, lots of interesting picks in C for a change. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can go there if you've used up or look like you're going to be using up or are saving allocations. Excuse me, for Austin Dillon and Kyle Larson. I know we in kind of prepping for this, we decided we weren't going to talk about Tony Stewart today because as of 3 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time on Thursday, there has not been an announcement as to whether or not, or as to who's going to be in that 14 car at Atlanta this week. But if it comes up that Tony does start, this is just I think kind of a no-brainer statement. Should people stay away from that car if it's Stewart in it this weekend, you think?
I don't know. By the numbers, he'd be a good driver. He missed last year because of the physical injury. But if you look at his last 3 races, he has a better than 9th place average finish. He won the 2010 Emory Healthcare 500 and had solid runs in his next 2. He's got a little something to prove, so it could be a good race for him if he shows up. But I wouldn't put him on the provisional roster until tonight, or until you know that he's going to show up, because he might not be there. If he's not and Jeff Burton's in the car again, then Jeff Burton, I think, is a good choice in Group C, because the car is certainly capable, the driver's certainly capable. You get a Group B car for a Group C value. So either way, I think the 14 is a good choice, probably a better choice in C with Burton than in B with Stewart. But I wouldn't shy away from Stewart automatically if he comes back. I think, okay. Like I said, I think he could have a little something to prove, and this could be the time to do it. Keep his mouth shut and let his right foot do the talking.
Yeah, good point. Okay, any final thoughts about the big race at Atlanta this weekend before we sign off for this week?
Pay close attention, because we've got all those other similarly configured mile-and-a-half track races coming up. As goes Atlanta, so will Chicagoland, Texas, Charlotte. You're going to be looking at some drivers getting momentum, starting with this race.
Yeah, and Chicagoland's only 2 weeks away. Okay, he is Dan Beaver. Follow him on Twitter at Fantasy Race. Follow me on Twitter at OnPitRow. As I said earlier, go to yahoosports.com and download Dan's PDF today for his weekly Yahoo Sports NASCAR Fantasy Racing report. It's just loaded. I don't know how he does it every week. And check him out at rotoworld.com. I don't know why that just doesn't pop right into my head yet. And that's it for this week. We'll be back next week to talk about Richmond as we go to one of my favorite tracks, the 3/4 mile flat track in Virginia. Dan, thanks. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.